This program is made possible by the support of Delta Dental, Quick Trip, Marshfield Clinic Health System, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Hospital Association. Watch WisconsinEye on Spectrum Channels 995 and 363 and at wiseye.org.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Senator Scott Fitzgerald, the Majority Leader in the Senate, joined by the Speaker, Robin Vos. And I think we're working out some of the... Do you have all the lights on here? The lights are on, yeah.
Unmute. The button right here, unmute. Yep, unmute.
There we go. How's that? Is that better? You okay? Yeah. Let me start over. I'm State Senator Scott Fitzgerald, the Majority Leader in the Wisconsin Senate, joined by the Speaker of the Assembly, Robin Vos. And we had agreed that we would try and pull together a media event that would include both of us to kind of not only, I think, talk a little bit about what Wisconsin is going through in light of the coronavirus episode, but also to try and answer any questions that might have come up as a result of either legislative operations or interactions with the executive branch, or kind of what we're seeing coming at us out of Washington, D.C. right now with the bills that have been passing through the legislature and with anticipation of what we might see in the next couple of days. So I'm glad to be here and look forward to questions. So I'll turn it over to the Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Fitzgerald. I want to start today, first of all, thank you for joining us, as Senator Fitzgerald said. But I do want to start by saying thank you to the people all across Wisconsin. We know how tough this has been. We know how stressful it's been on your families. For those of you who own a business, not just on you as the business owner, but of course on the people who work with you. I want to say that we understand the problems that Wisconsin is going through. My colleagues and I, all the legislators in both parties, have been doing very good work trying to listen to their districts, talk to people, help people connect with the benefits that they are entitled to through unemployment, making sure that if you're a business owner, you can understand what's in the orders given by Governor Evers. And that's why I wanted to be here today, to really make sure that people know that the legislature is here. We are hoping to be able to work with folks to get them the questions that they need to have answered. And most importantly, that we want to make sure we're accessible to you, to make sure that the questions are answered from the press, and also most importantly, that we are able to answer them also from our constituents. And I know we're going to be taking questions through Facebook Live. So with that, we'd be happy to answer the first question. All right, so we have a list of RSVPs. We're going to start with Pat from WisPolitics. Just a reminder, you do *6 to unmute. Pat from WisPolitics. Okay, next up we'll go to Gwen from the Wheeler Report. Gwen.
Can anybody hear us out there?
Just want to make sure that you guys are able to unmute. *6. Victor from Channel 58.
This is Monique Lopez.
Oh, hello, Monique.
Hi. Are you able to hear me?
Yep, go right ahead, Monique.
We can hear you, yep.
Okay, perfect. So my question is, would either one of you consider postponing the election, given the current climate?
I want to give credit to Governor Evers. I agree with his decision to say that we are going to hold this election. There are things that are really important, and we've learned that throughout this crisis. We know that if you work in a grocery store or you're someone who's delivering food products or making them, it's really important for you to be able to do your job. We know that if you're anywhere in the healthcare field, especially in a hospital or a clinic, your job is essential. And we thank you for going to work every single day in the face of who knows what as you report to work. And while those two things are paramount in this crisis, I also know that we live in a republic, and we live in one that has to have elections. The terms of office conclude, as Governor Evers has said, in April after the election. So we have to have new people or those who are in offices get reelected so they can help to make the decisions to keep our communities safe. So I agree with Governor Evers' decision. The election is moving along. We have already had hundreds of thousands of people request, and many of those cast a ballot. So I support the decision to move forward. I know we can do it safely, and I am, at this point, agreeing with Governor Evers that we should continue. Senator Fitzgerald?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different angles on this right now. I've had conversations not only with the governor, had a conversation with Mayor Barrett about what's going on in Milwaukee. I've talked to county clerks in my district, and have even had a few constituents reach out to us that have worked at the polls for many years. And obviously, early voting started on March 12th, and Wisconsinites have seemed to really have certainly, I think, become more comfortable with early voting. So what you're seeing is, as the Speaker said, just a massive amount of requests for a ballot to be mailed to them. In excess of 500,000 ballots have already been mailed out by the clerks of Wisconsin, and in excess of 100,000 of those have already been returned. And we expect that return number will continue to increase over the next couple of days. So the Speaker's right. The conversations that we've had with the governor up until this point have been he does not want to move the election date from April 7th. And that's certainly where I have been. I think a lot of other members of the Senate that I've spoken to feel that way as well. But I understand things are getting much different out there. And there are obviously a lot of concerns about what would that look like on Election Day on April 7th with the amount of poll workers and volunteers that you're going to need. So we're monitoring it very closely, I think, but at this point, I don't see a change, really, in the April 7th date. And, some of the clerks have become very resourceful and have set up their operations in a way that keeps the public safe, and yet all the boxes can certainly be checked as to running a good and solid and clean election. So I know the lawsuits have been filed in a couple of locations, the latest being in Green Bay. But, there's over 100,000 ballots cast in this election so far. So I don't see the election date really being changed at this point.
And I do want to just add a thank you to the clerks, who I think are really, by and large, doing a really good job. As Senator Fitzgerald said, a lot of creativity, drive-up voting, allowing people to have flexibility, and making sure that they still use their photo ID to follow all the statutes, but also do it in a way that keeps people safe. So thank you to the clerks who are out there for really doing an excellent job as much as they can. Next person that we have is, Victor from Channel 58. Caroline Peterson from NBC 15. Emily Fannin from WKOW.
Our phone number 414-780-352.
Somebody just unmuted.
So I have a question. Hello? Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Who is it? Yeah.
Hi, this is Victor from CBS 58.
Yep, hi, Victor.
Hi. In some of the things that Governor Evers has said, he said that some things will require some legislative action. Are you and Majority Leader Fitzgerald looking at potential dates to kind of reconvene, and is there anything specifically that would require legislative action in order to address this issues?
Well, the first thing I would say that has to happen is we have to digest and see the final package that comes out of Washington, D.C. It looks like they have found a bipartisan agreement, so thank you to the members of our delegation for working together and to try to find an answer that can do good things for Wisconsin. So before we do anything in our state, we need to make sure that we understand the full consequences of what help is coming from Washington, how it's accessed, what has to be done if any laws needed to be changed to access federal dollars. So I would say that's step number one. If there are things that we can do, and we have had some very early preliminary discussions with the governor's office, if there are things we can do to get rid of red tape, to allow people to not have to do things in a crisis like renewing their license and make sure we have access for healthcare professionals to stay on the job, of course those things are things we're going to look at and do whatever we can to make the process easier. But as far as getting into any details, we're not really at that point yet. But I certainly think that once we get the details of the federal government, we'll sit down with Governor Evers and try to see what's needed to be done.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's been kind of a cooperative discussion to try and see where there are things that the legislature certainly has to determine that they need to take action on. And also, at what level? Is it something that can be dealt with through the Finance Committee? Is it something that the full legislature has to convene on? So those are the types of questions I think we continue to discuss and try and figure out when it would be appropriate for us to bring the full legislature back together. We had a good dry run yesterday. Senator Roth ran a virtual state Senate session, and it went well. A few bugs to work out, but it went very well. So I'm hopeful that as soon as we come together kind of on policy, that it will kind of make it apparent that it's time for the legislature to come back into session.
All of the reporters have been unmuted by our master control, if you will. And so when your name is being said, you can ask your questions immediately. No *6 will be necessary.
Okay, let's go back to the top then. So is Pat here from WisPolitics? Or Gwen from the Wheeler Report?
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Gwen.
We can.
So you guys have the authority to adopt a joint resolution that would revoke the governor's public health emergency. Under what circumstances would you consider doing that?
I got to be honest with you. What you just laid out there is not something that I think we've run by Ledge Council attorneys or anyone else at this point. So I'm not really prepared to say that that would be something that we would even consider. But certainly trying to work with the governor so that we're not surprised by some of the decisions coming out of the East Wing. But not sure exactly how to respond to that because it's not something I've considered.
We all know 60 days is how long Governor Evers has the ability to use his enhanced authority. I think by and large, the people of Wisconsin want to understand why things are being done. So, I don't think there's been a lot of discussion in our caucus either about saying for the 60 days as we try to get through this crisis, and hopefully it's quicker than that. Governor Evers has the ability to make unilateral decisions. But I would say once we get past that 60 days, we have to see a very clear-cut reason, if there is any, to extend beyond those 60 days. So I think let's get past the crisis. We want to make sure that good decisions are made, hopefully more communication to the public and more explanation as to why decisions are being made. But I would say, by and large, that's just not a discussion we've been involved in. Caroline from NBC 15.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
We can.
Sorry about the unmuting.
Yeah, no problem.
Before, go silent on you. Question, so essentially we have a lot of Wisconsinites calling in worried about kind of the future of their jobs and the future of the economy of the state. I know you guys already touched on, any legislation that you might address later on, but maybe what is your reaction to that or your message to people in the workforce right now, or maybe action you guys might take in regards to that?
I mean, the one thing that I've heard from a lot of employers is that they're doing everything possible to retain their employees. Not only because they don't know what the duration of the crisis is going to be, and they remember, obviously, just a couple weeks ago that it was very difficult to find people to fill some of those positions. So if we can, once the crisis is averted, get this economy back up and rolling again, they want those skilled people, the people that a lot of them, on the job training type of stuff that are very valuable to them having good success. And so they're doing everything they can to kind of keep those people engaged. And certainly, I think a lot of them are hopeful that they're not going to end up losing those really good employees.
And I think that's one of the things that the legislature really offers in this situation is we are on the ground. We are talking to workers and families and teachers and business people and hearing the stories of how we know the impact that this is having on people's families, their livelihoods, and they want to get back to normal as quickly as they can. We have just seen today record numbers of people filing for unemployment. Many people have never had to go through that process. We have seen record numbers of people asking, should I stay at the job that I have? When are they going to reopen? Or should I start to look for a new one? So there's a lot of uncertainty that's out there. So, as a business owner myself, my own employees are worried. So I think it's really important for the people of Wisconsin to know that the people who are in these jobs hear you. We understand the problems that are going on out there because they're affecting us in much the same way. So we want to get this crisis solved, moved on, and be able to get back to as normal as we can as quickly as possible. And that's why we're trying to make sure the systems are in place so that it's clearly communicated so people know how long things are going to happen, what's the real world impact, and they can get quick answers from agencies or from legislators if we're able to get them ourselves. Next up, we have Melanie Conklin from Wisconsin Examiner.
Thank you. What are a few examples of bills each of you would like to see come up if you were to go into an extraordinary session? And Speaker, in particular, have you? I know the Senate Majority Leader said he's tested the virtual meeting. Are you doing anything similar in the Assembly?
Well, on the second question first, Melanie, I would say that we are going to do a session that is as safe as we possibly can. But I also would say every time I go in the grocery store, I see the people who are stocking the shelves, delivering the product, checking out customers. I have not been to a hospital, luckily, but I know the people who are there round the clock, making sure that if someone's sick or they have any kind of ailment, they are ready and able to work with them. So I think just like those two fields are incredibly important, so is being elected and doing the job of elected officials. So I would like to be able to have us come in and have a session in a way that's safe. If it's done by remotely, that's a possibility. Our preference would be to do something similar to what other states have done, where we do it in a way that still allows for the full debate, but allow people who have either compromised immune systems or have been in quarantine themselves to fully participate, but not make that a requirement. As far as where we are in terms of what bills I would like to look at, I know that I have been contacted by people whose licenses are going to have to come up. So if you're a nurse or a doctor, there's a lot of annual renewals. Businesses, most of them, even in food processing, as we need more and more folks to be able to stay in that field to produce the food we need. A lot of them have annual expirations that occur every month. So we would want to make sure that any of those expirations that happen, we don't stop food production because there was no one to process the permit. So I think there's a lot of simple things like that are really just bureaucracy that could have quick bipartisan support that would not harm anyone, but keep things moving in a way until we get back to normal.
Yeah, I think there's a number of bills that are less high profile too that'll probably come out as requests from the specific agencies, and then we'll work through those questions with the caucuses to see kind of where we can go. And then there's some being driven right now, I know, by the bill that just passed the U.S. Senate, things that specifically we will have to take up and implement. So, we're kind of right in the middle of that process, and still working with the caucuses to make sure that they're informed on those issues. But there's a number of pieces of legislation that are ultimately going to be in a position where they're going to have to be taken up just to address the seriousness of the issue.
Laurel White from Wisconsin Public Radio.
This is Sean Johnson with Wisconsin Public Radio.
Hi, Sean.
I know that you did not like the way that the governor's order was rolled out, his safer at home or stay at home order, but what do you think about the content of the order itself? Did he hit the right mix between keeping essential businesses open and closing other places, or do you have issues with it?
I guess what I would say is, I was disappointed in kind of the back and forth communication, but more importantly about the order itself. When I got a phone call about it, I mean, I was just kind of confused, I think, by exactly why it was rolled out or why it was kind of dropped or announced at 9:30, and then the details followed. I think it would have been much better for everyone involved if those issues would have been brought up, discussed publicly, and then ultimately the order would be crafted around that. When you read through the order, too, I mean, a lot of the specifics that are addressed are things that we had been familiar with, and maybe they took it a step further. Others seem to be somewhat redundant. So it is what it is at this point. We're working through. I've got a number of phone calls in the office, been talking to a number of constituents, business people that are still trying to exactly feel their way through this to see, what impact it might have on their business. And no, it wasn't the smoothest thing that certainly has happened so far, but I understand we're in a difficult period of time here, and things like that are going to happen.
On the actual order, there was an article in the paper today that I read that basically showed that most workers, I think it's almost a third, live paycheck to paycheck, and most have only a few paychecks, right? We know that on the business side, it's similar. I think it was half only have enough to operate for a month or 1 to 3 months or less. So the longer this order goes, the more businesses are never going to get the chance to reopen. And that is really my fear, that we try to make this situation go as quickly as we can. And the thing that's the most important from the government is to have clear communication and to have people who are able to answer questions. And when the WEDC website basically crashed because so many people had questions, that's a real problem if you're trying to get an answer and you can't even get anyone to call you back. A lot of people's voicemails are full. I mean, there's a lot of frustration out there that our caucuses are hearing about with the way that it's been implemented, not necessarily the fact that we had to do something along those lines. That's a different argument. The order's already in place, so it's not any sense to even argue whether or not it should happen. It's already done. The question is, how do we make it better? How do we make sure that if you have a question, you can actually get a timely answer? How do we make sure that if you are not certain how long you should keep employees or how long this is going to go in place, is April 24th a drop-dead date where no matter what we're going to reopen? Or is that an estimate? Because that's really different in how you do your employee planning, your cash planning, and your ability to work with your bank and your financial institutions to be able to finance not being open for well over a month. Because remember, for a lot of businesses, if you're a bar or a restaurant, they started to close down before this order even began. So while a month is a long time for a whole lot of businesses, we're talking 6 weeks for a lot of bars and restaurants that surveys have shown have a couple weeks worth of cash reserves. So it's really important for us to get this right and to be able to get these places up and running and get rid of the bureaucracy. Let people be able to do things that we know are simple and don't have people policing the streets trying to figure out how to get people a ticket, make sure that we have ways for them to get information so it's never even an issue. Next up is Scott Bauer from the Associated Press.
Hey guys, I want to go back to the election quickly. Would you support having the election on April 7th, but having it be mail-in ballots only?
No, I think we need to allow the clerks who have been incredibly resourceful to make those decisions. I mean, there are people who can figure a process where you only allow a certain number of people inside, right? You only, they've even said making sure every person has their own pen so that they give away a pen so nobody even uses that same thing. I think there are a lot of ways that we can ensure that they are done safely. One of my colleagues today called and told me that he actually has worked it out where all the people in his district are going to get sanitizer and he's going to make sure that he provides it. So I think there's a lot of things that are already being done that don't require us to do anything like an all-mail ballot, which first of all wouldn't be allowed to be ordered by the governor. It has to be done through an action of the legislature. So it's not something that can be done just by himself. But again, I want to compliment Governor Evers. He has been consistent in saying we have to have this election happen, and you can't do it if people don't have the ability, what they're doing literally as we're on the phone, which is to go in person, to drive through, the ability to talk to somebody and do it in a safe way. That seems to me that would really undermine the election if we don't allow the process to continue as we are.
Yeah, I just think there's a certain group of citizens as well that have voted at the polls on Election Day for many, many, many years, and that's still what their expectation is. They're not going to go online and request a ballot. They're not going to participate in that type of process. And we would have had to start to make that move months and months ago to try and educate the population of the state that this is how voting is going to occur this time. So I understand, I got a letter from Mayor Barrett in regards to that, and I know there's been some discussion about it, but I think we are way too far in with early voting starting on March 12th to suddenly make that proclamation that that's the only way you're going to be able to vote on April 7th.
And for the media, Washington State just went to an all-mail system, and if you go and look at the Secretary of State's comments, he talked about the amount of time it took to make sure that the system was done correctly, because we cannot have people questioning the election. So to somehow throw this together in the matter of several weeks will really undermine the confidence of the public versus having a system that continues as we have always done it with some adaptions that are done by the clerks at the local level. Emily, Fannin, did you have a question?
Yeah. You guys hearing me? Okay?
Yep, go ahead, Emily.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I want to go back to the order. So I just want to get clarity. Do you support the governor for issuing the safer at home order? Because I know, Speaker, you just said you were a little frustrated with the lack of communication, but do you just support his decision to enact it?
So, the governor has more information than he has shared with us. Okay, so I have to accept the fact that he is looking at all the facts and he is trying to make the best decision that he can. I have serious doubts about the way that the order was put into place, where it seems like some people got exemptions, but other people did not in a very similar industry. Even how you do landscaping, they've kind of micromanaged if you can do certain landscaping things and certain other ones you cannot. So I have questions about how the order is. They didn't consult us. If they had, it probably would have had different advice. But again, I can sit around and criticize, past decisions that have already been made, but I just don't think that's all that helpful. So what I'm trying to focus on is trying to make sure that when we go forward, as we are making decisions, we are not going in and doing things without a clear direction, a clear understanding, and ultimately, I would hope, consulting other elected officials to try to get the best ideas together and then ultimately have that be the one that's announced, as opposed to the process that occurred during the order, which was really him just talking to his internal advisors and then telling us what the order was. I wish we would have had more consultation with the public and would have had more thought process as to how we can make the order work in a way that has the least impact on workers and business owners.
Yeah, I just think we'll see what the full implications of this are in the next couple of weeks, and see whether or not the public adheres to some of these controls that the governor's put in place, and then what effect could that have on the overall numbers in Wisconsin. The Speaker and I were on the phone the other day with both Medical College of Wisconsin as well as Children's Hospital and their physicians and administrators. I've also talked to a number in my own district, and the issue continues to come up. They're very concerned about kind of how quickly the ERs fill up. And some believe that these tighter orders, whether they're in Wisconsin or in other states, obviously will have a direct effect on that. But obviously the jury's out on that now, and we'll see where we head. But the thing I would like to emphasize is that we need better communication up front with the administration to be able, we can assist the governor in explaining these things. If there are things that we really think make sense, and that, if you can get the members of the legislature, if you can get buy-in on some of these things, I don't think anybody is a better messenger for the state of Wisconsin than probably the Wisconsin legislature. So we'd just like to be part of that process and part of those decisions that are being made.
Next up, we have Sean Kirby from Wisconsin Health News.
Hi. Just a few quick questions. One would be, what advice would you have given the governor before he issues this order? And do you support President Trump's timeline for opening the country back up again by Easter? Thank you.
Well, on the president's kind of timeline, I think this has got to be driven not necessarily by the calendar, but more so about what we see on a daily basis when we're talking about healthcare discussions. That's what should drive that decision, not necessarily the calendar. I'm not sure kind of what the effects are. I mean, I'm gathering information from the national media just like anybody else is. I've been watching the president's press conferences on a daily basis, having discussions with members of our congressional delegation. So we're just trying to gather as much information as possible and then react to that is kind of where I'm at right now.
And I would say, by and large, I think the president and his team have done a good job. But they also are working on trying to communicate as best they can. To the credit of the White House, they've had daily calls with us. I feel like we have a very good understanding of what the White House is trying to communicate, and we're helping in that way in many circumstances. But I will also say this is something where, as you think about the healthcare system in general, I think the healthcare systems and hospitals also need to do a better job explaining to people what's actually occurring in real time. Because we know all across the state, most elective surgeries have been delayed or canceled. That means there's a lot of open hospital beds right now getting ready for the potential of a crisis. But it'd be helpful for us to know when the numbers are reported, how many total tests, how many total people have been discovered to be positive with the virus, how many have been hospitalized, and how many of the total beds is that actually taking up so people can see what the crisis is doing to our hospitals. And I think we've been really lacking in doing that. So I think there's a lot more information that the public wants to see. As I've been learning, there's never been a time where more people are on social media or watching the news. So they are thirsting for information. And that is the thing that when I saw the order come out frustrated me the most is, we're going to tell you tomorrow what we're doing. Well, I think people want to know the answer more quickly than we'll get to you the answer tomorrow. And even now, there are still unanswered questions as to what businesses are allowed to be open and what aren't. So I think those are the kind of things people are more frustrated with than anything. Next up, we have Mitchell Schmidt from the Wisconsin State Journal.
Yes, sir. Say Mitch. My phone call.
Yep. Yeah, hi, Mitch.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the call. Not to dwell on the order, but you had mentioned, some businesses being exempt while others weren't. Do you have any examples of any that, having a day to look at it now, that this is something that you feel should be allowed to be open, or vice versa, this is something that maybe shouldn't be at this time?
Well, I want to be careful because I don't want to say something should be closed because in general, I think most business people have made very wise decisions that if they are allowed to be open, they're doing it in a way that keeps their employees safe. They certainly don't want their customers to be in harm's way. But I think an example would be we learned today that they have told landscapers that they may not be in operation. But then they changed it and said, well, if you're applying pesticide, that's okay, but if you're planting trees, that's not. I mean, it just seems like some of the decisions that are being made don't make a whole lot of sense if you just look at it, and that's why I'm trying not to be critical of individual ideas. I mean, that's one example, but trying to be clear and crystal clear so people understand the rationale behind it as opposed to just getting an arbitrary decision. I think that's the frustration, Mitch.
Yeah, I think I'll just add, these are tough decisions. I'm not trying to say that each and every decision that's been made coming out of the East Wing is something that that we should pick apart or scrutinize. This is a tough place to be, but there are communities, and I think some of the city councils or the mayors you talk to they're just looking for clarity. And as long as we can continue to help provide that, I think it'll make the crisis much less difficult.
Exactly. Rich Kirchen from the Business Journal.
Hi, guys. Robin, you're a small business owner. I hear the popcorn business is going well at the moment. What would your message be, and what's your experience been? What's the most important thing from your perspective to let the small business owners know at this point?
Rich, that's a great question. So I have probably spent more of my time fielding panic phone calls from small business, big business, a lot of workers who wonder if they should go to work or not. So I feel like we're part-time counselors just trying to explain to people what's going on. And that's one of the important things that people need to remember is, number one, we're all in this together. Nobody has every answer. Nobody is going to make 100% perfect calls. And that's why we're trying to do the best that we can, especially for people who are in those industries that are important. Let's make sure that people are able to guarantee an answer. That's the one that's the most important. If you have a hospital and you want questions answered, we got to get those answers right away. For the balance of people who are considered essential, frankly, I think every job is essential, so I don't even like that term. But I would say for the businesses that have been allowed to remain open, they need to make sure they have access to workers. If there are people who are unemployed, let me tell you, there are industries right now that are desperate for people as they are ramping up to help deal with the crisis. If you're a medical manufacturer and you want to get more devices made for whatever the needs are of a hospital, they need extra workers. So if you're out of work, look online and see what positions are hiring. I mean, I saw just this week, Amazon's hiring more people because so many people are hiring online or buying things online. We know that Quick Trip is hiring more people, that, there's Walmart needs more folks. So even if it's to go and do some kind of temporary work, those positions have to be filled. So even though we're in a tough place for an awful lot of people who have been unemployed and they're filing for unemployment, the reverse is true. There's a lot of businesses that need people tomorrow to help meet the needs for where we are. So it's just important to look at both sides of the equation, that it's not people just sitting at home watching TV, even though that's a big chunk of folks who are kind of wondering what's going to happen to their job. There's a lot of positions that need to be filled. So I just want to make sure that we're also doing a good job of communicating that people should look for other opportunities if they can, because there are still jobs that need to be filled today.
I didn't have anything more.
Yeah, okay. Next up would be Jason Calvi from Fox 6. All right. Bob Haig from the Wisconsin Radio Network.
This is Raymond from Wisconsin Radio Network.
Oh, hey, Raymond.
I guess one of the questions we're looking for is, you had mentioned having discussions with both small business owners and with the medical professionals in response to the original statement from Governor Evers. I guess the question here is, how best do you think we should be handling that balance at this point? And a lot of the things have come through the discussion at that time. Where should we be going, and what would you like to see if you had been crafting this order?
I'll just say I think there are some constants. There's some things that we do know, and we're gathering more of that information. Wisconsin Hospitals Association has been very helpful on that front. I mean, we know that there's approximately 1,300 ventilators in the state. We know that there's 400 ICU beds. And then as they monitor the increases in cases, they know how that kind of matches up. So, if there are things that we need to react to, if there's things we need to put in place, if there's things we need assistance from the federal government on, I mean, it's literally an hour by hour type of situation where you have a piece of information and then you just kind of add that in and filter it all out to see what's our next move. And Wisconsin isn't any different than any other state on that front. But, that's what the business community, like I said, that's what the school system is doing. Certainly, I think, that's absolutely what the healthcare field is doing, whether it's hospitals, docs, or clinics, whatever might be available. Not every county in Wisconsin has a hospital, period. And then some have small rural hospitals that have a different set of challenges than what you might see compared to the larger hospitals. Aurora is another example where suddenly, they had testing sites that were up and running, and then those had to be taken down because they ran out of tests available. So, I mean, it's like this, it's a storm of information that is out there, and we need to continue to filter through that.
All right, next up, Molly Beck or Patrick Marley from the Journal-Sentinel. Are you guys on?
Yeah, we're both here actually. Thanks for doing this call. My question was for Senator Fitzgerald, since he's running for Congress, and that is, would you have voted for this $2 trillion package that the Senate is about to pass or just passed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is an issue that's obviously been created because the government is asking the private sector to shut down. And this is not like some of the other crises that have existed or emerged. So at the end of the day, I think this package will hopefully pull the private sector out from a deep hole that's begun to be created I'm optimistic, though. I think that, businesses are resourceful. The individuals that need the help, this is the assistance that they probably need to survive in the short period of time in which it's going to take to beat the coronavirus. And, I would have supported it.
And I'd like to thank our congressional delegation, those who actually worked on this. I give credit to our, at least the Republicans who voted no on the first bill because they didn't even get a chance to read the bill. It was kind of thrown on them and kind of given just a few minutes to read it. I think this time around, hopefully, they've done a good job of negotiating a real bipartisan package and allow the members of Congress to actually read it so they know what's in it. And then, assuming that they do, just like Senator Fitzgerald did, they can vote yes.
Hi, this is Molly. Thanks for this call. My question is, I understand your offices have received a draft of a bill aimed at providing some relief. Could you tell us what's in that bill and how much it would cost and what your thoughts are on the proposal?
So the idea, there's a bunch of ideas that are floating around. The governor's office has some things that were asked for by agencies. We're in the middle of kind of reviewing some of their asks. I think our staffs are going to start working on listening to some of the ideas and understanding the rationale. So it's way too early for us to say, there are concrete ideas or things that we could or could not support. So I'm going to reserve judgment on that until, once again, we have a chance to understand the breadth of what they're asking for and the details involved in each one of the ideas as they come to us.
Yeah, I'll just add, it'll be interesting once we get the analysis from Fiscal Bureau on what's coming through from Congress on the details and how we can implement that or work through that. But that's happening as we sit here today.
J.R. Ross from WisPolitics.
Hi, guys. One, I guess when I ask, what's the communication been with the governor's office lately? And two, these packages that are being levied, I know they sent surveys out to agencies asking them for what kind of input or change they're looking for. Are they asking us to be an active participant in what agencies are asking for? Are they presenting ideas to you guys and having you react to them? How is that working?
I mean, I haven't talked directly to any members of the cabinet, which might surprise some people, I guess. Most of our communication has been through Chief of Staff Maggie Gao. The governor's been on the line with us a couple of times. Obviously, far more communication than what we have had over the last year and a half. I will say, some of the exchanges are good. I've picked up a few things here and there that they've brought to my attention that otherwise I would not have known about. I think we've brought some things to their attention that either we're hearing about in our districts or from members. So I would say it's definitely of value, and I hope that those types of conference calls continue.
And Fitz is right. I would say also that, as we're looking at ideas, Senator Fitzgerald is 100% right that we cannot do anything until we understand what's happening from Washington, D.C. They just passed a $2 trillion package, and a big chunk of that money is aimed towards states, it's aimed towards small businesses, it's aimed toward workers. Well, I don't feel it's appropriate for us to duplicate things that are already being done by the federal government. So I want to understand the ramifications of what they are proposing way before we decide to do anything on our side so that we can be smart and wise, because we can't print money and we don't have the ability to borrow for operations like the federal government does. So we've got to make every dollar stretch further, and that's why I'm optimistic that in the end, if there are holes that the federal government did not do, we could potentially take a look at filling in some of those, but we have to be very judicious in how we spend the state's dollars, because we already know that the surplus is gone, right? That surplus was based on 2 years worth of revenue projections because we had a fantastic economy before this happened. So most of that surplus is gone, and probably in the second year of the 2-year budget, we're not even sure if that budget's going to balance without spending a nickel more than we already have. So we've got to be cautious, and that means getting the smartest people together, coming up with the ideas that have to happen, and then figuring out how we proceed from there. Charles Benson from TMJ4.
Thanks for taking my call. You addressed one of my questions there in terms of the projected revenue surplus, what that will mean if it does take a hit, and has it also changed, given the current situation, how you might target some of that money compared to how you previously thought in terms of an income tax cut? The other thing is, as you know, we're at 120,000 that filed for unemployment. My understanding is the state has a healthy unemployment fund, but is the system set up to get that money quickly to those unemployed workers, or does some red tape need to be removed?
You know, Charles, as an employer, my employees have gone through that process as they even let go or they've quit. So I know that the unemployment system in general does a pretty good job. I think that in general, with the exception of the huge number of people who have filed, and that's something that you can't predict, I think the department has done the best they can trying to help people who get filed to get their benefits. So I think that system is already fairly automatic, and they do a pretty good job. I think we do have a healthy reserve, but remember, as that fund is drawn down, there are automatic tax increases that are put into place on small business. So we've got to be judicious in that as well, that if we draw that fund down too quickly, knowing that we are potentially, especially at the federal level and perhaps at the state level, allowing people to have grace periods or more time to pay either income taxes, unemployment taxes, payroll taxes, that fund might be harder to fill back up. So we just want to, once again, we don't want to rush into anything. We want to make a decision that's going to last, because hopefully this is a very short-term recession that we are potentially going into. People are unemployed and they get their jobs back quickly and we can return to somewhat normal. But if this does go longer, we have to be very careful that we have enough money to pay benefits if people are out of work for longer than the 3 to 6 weeks that we're hoping for. So that's why we're trying to, actually the Fiscal Bureau is doing an analysis right now for us to kind of see the health of the fund and how we weather whatever potential storm we have.
I'll just add, on that front, I've asked the administration every time I've had an opportunity, because in other states they have increased the workforce that will handle these claims. And so I continually put it on their radar and continually ask the question, are you sure you have enough people in place? Do you need additional people? And the response so far is that they're very sensitive to that and they understand that. So I'm not expecting any type of delay. It sounds like they're putting those personnel in place.
Matt Smith or Kent Wainscott from WISN?
Hi, guys. This is Kent. Can you hear me?
Hey, Kent. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. I just kind of follow up on that, weathering the storm and for how long. I know some of the confusion or questions in the 24 hours leading up to the governor's order revolved around how long it would last. Was a 30-day order the right call?
You know what? I think it was the right call to have some kind of date so people can plan. Once again, not having as much information as Governor Evers does, I'm not going to criticize him for 30 days. I'm not going to compliment him because I just don't know. But what I will say is I think it's good that he gave a date, because every business person that I know wants to understand, when are they going to be allowed to generate revenue again? When are they going to be allowed to have employees come back? Can employees come back to get everything ready to go so that they can come back on the 24th to open on the 25th? There's a lot of questions that people have. Once again, I think it's a hard call. I don't think it's easy for anybody to do, but at least people feel like they have a date certain to be able to say, okay, I can plan my sale. I think there's going to be one heck of a sale for an awful lot of businesses that are going to occur right after April 24th. So I think it's going to be good, a big shot in the arm for our economy. And hopefully it's sooner. Once again, that's hopefully the farthest date out. God willing, things change and we can get businesses open even quicker. But it's good for us to know. So I give him credit for that.
I mean, I asked that question point blank of the chief of staff, and the answer was that they had consulted healthcare, and they thought that's what it would take to tamp down the curve. So it was very straightforward, and that they think that this was an action that needed to be taken to make sure that people were not socializing and breaking all of the kind of rules that we've become very familiar with over the last couple of weeks in social distancing. So that was the answer I got from the administration.
Amy Reed from Channel 3.
Okay. Can I just follow
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Real quickly? Yeah, you mentioned earlier the governor has the ability to extend it to 60 days if you saw fit at that time. Are you expecting or telling people to prepare for the possibility this could be extended to 60 days?
I don't anticipate that, but it's very clear in the statutes that Governor Evers' powers basically expire at 60 days. That's where he has the ability with this public health emergency. If he comes to us and we negotiate, perhaps it could go longer, but I do not think that is likely to happen. I think, in fact, it's very unlikely to go beyond the 60 days. Because after that point, of course, we could still pass legislation. They could still come to the legislature, but it requires a lot more collaboration than the current 60-day order does, where he basically can do many of these things without any consultation going forward.
I was just going to say the bigger question I think that we're getting repeatedly is whether or not K-12 education is coming back or not, or are they just going to stay out until the summer months? That's been the question that's come up more frequently. I don't have an answer for you on that as we sit here today, but that seems to be on the minds of many people.
Amy Reed from Channel 3.
Thanks. Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead, Amy.
I was wondering if this is just clarification on the election, if there are any changes that you two would support, for example, further extending online voter registration or removing the witness signature requirement on absentee ballots.
So the lawsuit was filed, and we basically accepted the fact that we should have longer online registration, and I think that's all the way until the Friday before the election, if I remember right.
That's right.
Yeah, so people can do online registration a long time, much longer than normal. In the past, that required a postcard to go out, so if you register online, we could actually make sure that you were living at that address. More or less, we're allowing that system to kind of go by the wayside at this one time. So I think in the ways that we could to make sure if anybody's not registered, and we know we still have same-day registration, so people could on the day of the election, but we have gone in every way we can to try to encourage people to vote. Let's remind everybody that you can go online today, you can request an absentee ballot, you can cast your ballot, and we want that to happen as much as we can, but you can also go down to your clerk and do drive-by voting and make an appointment in many cases, or our hope is a limited number of people will go and vote on election day like they always have. So I think this is too important for us to not move forward. We have got to get this election. There's a lot of people who are local elected officials who are on the front lines of this crisis today that need to have those offices filled so we can go forward.
I have a quick follow-up there.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So I've heard from quite a few people that are worried they're in isolation or quarantine by themselves. They want to mail in their absentee ballot, but they don't have anyone to sign the witness spot. Is that something that you would consider doing away with for this election?
Well, it's in the statute, so people need to follow the existing law. What I would say is if for some reason they don't have anybody, email their legislator's office. I saw online today one of my colleagues had someone who didn't have a witness, and she literally went over there. They passed the ballot out through the crack in the door. She witnessed it and gave it back to the woman to do it. So I think people are doing whatever they can to help people make sure that they can vote. And before we just wipe away an entire statute in the law, let's look for strategies to help people achieve the same result and make sure that they can get done in a way that's practical. Next up is Bill Osmulski from MacGyver.
Yes. What was your reaction when Secretary Designate Andrea Palm said that 1,500 Wisconsinites could be dead in 2 weeks? And is that consistent with what you're hearing from the hospitals?
From what I know, that's not consistent. I did not hear her say that, so I'll take you at your word. I think it's important for us to be really clear that a lot of what we are preparing for is the worst case scenario, right? These are based on models and hypotheticals. Let's hope that they are wrong. I hope that every one of these predictions comes not to be true and that it was an overreaction, but we won't know that. And that's why I think we have to balance out the ability to be ready for this crisis, and if there's a huge onslaught of people, to make sure that they get the care that they are going to desperately need, but also not do it in a way that bankrupts our country, bankrupts our state, and has our economy so on its heels that we can't get back to normal in a relatively short time.
I did not hear that she had said that either. What I would say is that they still are working off of a model. The healthcare professionals in Wisconsin are working off a model that shows that the cases will double every 3 days. So if you play that out, obviously it doesn't take long for those numbers to increase significantly. I'm not sure if that's what she was doing or why she would have made that comment.
Michael Spalding from WTMJ Radio. Jessica from Up North News.
Hey, yeah, thanks for taking my call. My questions had to do with the rainy day fund, and some of that has already been answered. The only other question I have, though, is do you have a number or a dollar amount right now that is in that fund?
Well, it would be $600 million before this last, what we had anticipated would bump that up even higher, but Yeah, we haven't had any discussions, I think, beyond that on just, what the legislature's view of that would be or what the governor's view would be.
And that's the thing that is just important for the public to remember is that, Wisconsin has a 2-year budget, July 1st to June 30th, and then the same thing a second time. So we're in that first year of a 2-year budget. So the second year is based on income, sales tax, revenue projections that are going to definitely be different than what we predicted when we passed the budget this last summer. So we want to be really careful to make sure that the investments that we're making are judicious and wise. But luckily, we have had the past 8 years, we have done a good job of putting money in that rainy day fund, unlike we did before when we had the last recession where there was nothing in there and we had to have dramatic cuts. So hopefully we won't need anywhere near that size of cuts because we have this money in our savings account, but it's still a finite amount of money and we've got to be careful on how we spend it. Next up, Will Keneally from PBS Wisconsin.
Hi, thank you guys again for doing this. And I don't mean to make you guys peer too much into the crystal ball, but is there anything that would cause you guys to take legislative action sooner, like X number of cases or a decreased number of available hospital beds?
Well, I think a lot of what we're going to see is a dramatic impact of what the federal government has done. Because remember, they have created family leave for folks. They have extended loans for billions and billions and billions of dollars for small business. I believe there's a stimulus package of $150 billion for states and local governments. Well, we need to know what that is before we decide how we're going to deploy it best to help Wisconsinites. So that's why I think we're going to do things as quickly as we are able to, but we're not going to rush into it and make bad decisions like I think we learned from 8 years ago when we were in the same, 10 years ago when we were in the same situation, that, when stimulus money came, I know there's a lot of incentive to hurry and get it out the door, but we don't want to do it in a way that grows the size of government after this recession is over. We don't want to do it in a way that grows the bureaucracy or red tape and makes it actually harder for people to access the money, albeit under the best of circumstances as we go forward.
Yeah, I think, we have to pivot, and we just don't know what that day is going to be, but both at the national level and at the state level, we have to pivot back to life as we knew it before, and we just want to make sure that we do that in a proper and in a smart way.
Anthony from Spectrum News.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Obviously, you guys are taking a wait-and-see approach to legislative action, as you just mentioned, but I'm receiving several calls from local leaders, like this afternoon I know Madison's mayor asked about waiving interest and penalties on deferred property tax payments. Any thoughts on those kind of requests from local leaders throughout Wisconsin?
I'm always open to looking at some of those ideas, but again, even under the worst case scenario, it sounds like upwards of, even if we had a double-digit unemployment rate, we're still going to have an awful lot of people who are working. So if we were able to create scenarios where someone has lost their job, they're not able to collect unemployment because it sounds like now unemployment could be up to $1,000 per week per person. That's a pretty generous unemployment benefit. So I want to make sure what the real needs are before we try to hamstring local governments by saying, they don't collect property taxes or they're able to collect fees. But certainly if someone's suffering, I am open to the idea of delaying so that they don't have to pay interest or penalties through no fault of their own.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that's where a lot of the requests ultimately will percolate up from is probably local levels of government and their interactions with businesses within their own community. It's already begun, and I think those issues will continue.
Todd Richmond from Associated Press.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Todd.
I can.
Hi. Robin, you had mentioned in passing that the governor could not move to a mail-in only election by himself. That would take an act of the legislature. Is that correct?
That's what we've been told by Leg Counsel.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Monique from WLUK.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Monique.
Yep.
Hi, perfect. Thank you so much. So why not, kind of going back to the election, why not follow other states who have chosen already, to postpone their primaries?
Well, I think you'd have to turn the clock back to prior to March 12th. There seemed to be consensus throughout the state amongst clerks, the governor, the legislature, that we should proceed with the election as scheduled. And, like I said, we're 100,000 ballots into that right now. If somebody would have made the case back then, it might have changed things, but it just seems the most reasonable approach right now is to continue the way it's teed up right now.
Adam Rogan from the Racine Journal-Times.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep, hi Adam.
Hi guys. So it's kind of, again, another election question, I'm sorry, but quite a few people in the country have said that wanting to pursue business as usual and pushing forward the election or businesses in general is putting the wants of institutions above the health of people. Obviously, you both and the governor and plenty of others want to push forward with the election regardless, so how do you respond to people saying that pushing forward with an election like this is putting Wisconsinites' lives at risk?
I just don't agree with that from the standpoint that, first of all, I trust our clerks, and I've been watching what they've been doing in our own community in Racine County. I just read in the Journal-Times, it was this morning or yesterday, you had a list of all the municipalities that are doing early voting, and many of them are being really creative. Some are doing drive-up. Others are doing by appointment. Others are doing it like they always have. In Burlington, they've actually moved it to the police department, so you get to vote, but it's behind the traditional plexiglass like a police department would have. So I think people are really responding to the way to balance it out, right? People have the right to cast their ballot because we live in a republic. You have to have elections. If a politician can cancel elections on a whim, no matter how serious the problem is, I think that undermines the faith and the basic tenets of our democracy. So that's why having the election, doing it in a safe way, is the best course of action. And that's why I have faith that our clerks, I know all across the state, they're recruiting more people. They're getting young people to volunteer. They are doing it in a safe way. So I think the election isn't going to be perfect, but I think it's going to be an awful lot better than some dire predictions are, because we've got really good, smart, capable, dedicated people who are going to make it happen. Next up, Steve from the Capital Times.
Hi. You talked earlier about the importance of messaging through this. Some in both of your caucuses have been critical openly about executive order. Do you see a problem coalescing around a message from the legislature to the public?
I don't, in the fact that, look, if you would have told a lot of us 60 days ago that we were going to have the governor basically issuing orders that all of us have to follow, I think most of us would have said you were, reading from a movie script, right? This is a different reality than any of us have ever been in before. So I think we're going to look back and have questions about how all this went, but this is not the appropriate time to question it, right? So I think we need to look back and say, how does our republic work? How do we make sure that every branch of government is more involved in the decision-making process than what we had this time? So I think there's legitimate criticism that's being leveled, but I also don't know if now is the appropriate time to level it. I would prefer for us to be able to get the crisis solved, learn our lessons, point out things that are really bad, if there are any, and then try to fix it as we come back and have the lesson of history to be able to look back on to make those corrections.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that I've got individual members that are raising issues and doing it publicly. I think that's certainly appropriate.
Yeah.
And makes that part of the discussion.
Lastly, before we take our Facebook questions, Matt Kittle from Empower Wisconsin. All right, we have questions from Facebook. Kit and Alec, do you want to just read some of those off for us?
Yeah, Jay Schroeder was asking, would the legislature consider a constitutional amendment to change the way a declaration of emergency is declared to allow the legislature to have a say?
We could look at that in the future, but there's not a need for a constitutional amendment. The power given to the governor is by statute. So this was done making sure if we had an emergency, I think it was sometime in the mid-2000s, to ensure that we had continuity in government and the idea that if bad things happen, that decisions are being made. So I think while it's not been perfect, I certainly want to make sure that decisions can be made in a way that actually gets answers to people as they need them. So yes, we could certainly make some improvements, and that's something that we'd like to talk about. I know our caucus already has said we want to study this as we come back, but I don't think we can do it right now.
I'd be open to that discussion as well.
Yeah.
That'd be fine.
Is the legislature allowed to revise the emergency order?
So the legislature has the ability, if Senator Fitzgerald and I chose to come back in, we could basically end the public health emergency, but we do not necessarily have the ability to go in and just pass an amendment or pass a change to one of the executive orders without eliminating the ability to have the public health emergency. So that's why we have to be patient and hopefully work with Governor Evers and try to make sure that he continues to listen to not only the people inside his inner circle, but hopefully the public and legislators and people who have all kinds of different perspectives. So that's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, and the executive branch, they need to be nimble and have the ability to make quicker decisions than certainly you could expect the full legislature to make. So I think that part is appropriate. But also, we should have the ability to rein that in if, in fact, we think it goes way beyond where we should be. So I think the balance test there is appropriate.
Mary Schmidt,
hey, gentlemen.
Yes, sir. Yeah, sir.
My apologies. It's Matt Kittle from Empower.
Oh, hi, Matt.
I was on mute before.
Yep.
Hi. Thank you again for this obviously very important teleconference today with the press. Much has been said today of public safety, rightfully so. But what of the questions of civil liberties? That's not really been addressed here today. The governor's order, for very clear reasons, has to infringe on some individual liberties. But a recent dissent by Justice Rebecca Bradley, I think, kind of put all of this in perspective, that exigent circumstances do not mean that we give up our constitutional rights, and I think you both have pointed that out with elections, for instance. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the balance between civil liberties, constitutional rights, and exigent circumstances like this.
Matt, I totally associate myself with Justice Rebecca Bradley's dissent in her comments. I think that we are learning that something that I never thought would actually happen is that the government has the ability to make decisions, albeit perhaps necessary, but we have to always have that constitutional check of an active legislature, an independent judiciary, and an executive that is able to make some of those decisions. So these are things that we are going to come back and have to take a look at, because fundamentally, I think that we have our entire republic is based on the concept of three co-equal branches. And we have temporarily loaned the ability to make decisions without the same due process that we go through to the executive in an emergency. But that is for a finite amount of time and in a finite amount of circumstances. So that's why the very idea of those who think the governor should be able to cancel an election, that is what you do in like a junta republic. That does not happen where you just cancel elections, right? So this is what we have to have in a republic. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it takes longer than it should, but we have to find a balance to be able to make sure that at the end we're going to recognize the republic that we live in, and we're not have given away all of our civil liberties, and somehow that becomes the norm that people begin to accept. I think that the idea that the government can shut down businesses is one that I have serious problems with, right? But I also respect the fact that this should be really rare and under the most difficult circumstances. And frankly, this is in those cases. So I think we have to find that balance, and it's not easy. We're going to be able to look back in hindsight and perhaps say we made a lot of mistakes. But I don't know how else we can try to get this virus under control so that we can get rid of the ability for all of these things to hamper our ability to move and to associate basic fundamental American rights.
I completely agree with the speaker. I think that's why this is so painful right now, is because not only Wisconsinites but Americans are so used to having those liberties, and even if they don't exercise them on a daily basis, suddenly when it's taken away from them, it is just something that goes against the grain of everyone that lives in this state and this country, and that's the way it should be. We should not tolerate this for no good reason, and we certainly shouldn't tolerate it for a long period of time unless it's in the public's best interest. And that's the balance test we're working through right now.
Facebook questions?
Yes, Mary Schmidt is worried about those individuals who are self-employed and are hourly workers. How does the federal stimulus package help them? Do you know?
I don't have the answer. I don't have the full answer to that yet. Obviously, we just are still kind of making our way through that. The only thing I will say is that healthcare has been a question that continues to come up, and how will those individuals be affected when, and are there changes in the federal bill that will have a direct effect on those that are self-employed.
I know that at least in my congressional district, and I think each of our members of Congress are doing it in one way or another, but Congressman Brian Stile is going to do a conference call with all the Republican and Democrat legislators in his congressional district. I think it's today or tomorrow, where he's hoping to give us an update with more information. So I apologize that we just can't tell the answer. But once we do, if you email our office, I am happy to share whatever information that we have to make sure you get answers to your questions too.
Marsha Lambert is asking about state employees who work in the prison system and mental health facilities. They are needing guidance and sufficient protective equipment during the pandemic. Are you making this a priority?
Yeah, PPE is something that comes up on every conference call, and as well the correction system and correctional officers specifically. That is a group of state employees that are in a very difficult position right now. We are monitoring it very closely. I know the administration is as well. They're very concerned about what's happening within the prison system. That's another day by day. And the PPE, the quicker we can get that, there are certainly more. There's more PPE available now because of stockpiles, but also because there's more manufacturing going on in and around it. So I'm hopeful that there will be a ton of relief on that front very, very quickly.
All right, Rachel Meyer is asking if there's a plan for the legislature to repeal the 1-week wait for the unemployment benefits that are currently in place.
So I think the discussion has been around the idea of perhaps suspending them because the 1-week waiting period is a way to make sure that our fund stays solvent. That's why it was put into place. It's why we have one of the healthiest unemployment balances in the entire country. But we know people are suffering, and that's why we want to look and see, wait for the Fiscal Bureau. They're going to so the analysis is going to happen to make sure that if we made a decision for a temporary suspension, that we would be able to do it in a way that allows folks to get their benefits but not have a massive tax increase on many of the same small businesses who have no revenue. So trying to find that balance is going to happen. I'm hopeful that once we get that analysis back, we could do a small, short-term suspension to be able to get us through this crisis. But at the same time, the federal government just made a huge decision, again, that Wisconsin's benefits are about $370 per person. They are adding $600 on top of that. So for the vast majority of Wisconsin workers, they're going to have almost the same salary that they did prior to this pandemic occurring. So I think we want to wait and make sure, again, what's the federal stimulus? How is that going to impact us, not just on businesses, that's one small part, but really on the workers and the families that need to have the resources to pay their mortgage, make sure they have their utilities. But, Governor Evers has made some decisions. He said that if you don't pay your utility bills, your utility can't be turned off. We know that banks and institutions are working with individuals to try to say, look, we won't have late penalties or delay your payments. We know people are in a tough time. So we want to try to find a balance to make sure we can do that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Last one?
Last one for you. Ed Folger is asking about allowing people to get haircuts that are needed. Is that possible?
Well, I need a haircut. This is my normal week to go and get one. I don't know about you. But that is something where it's not a decision that we get to make. My wife is going to have to learn her skills because, we all need to have things like that. So, again, hopefully on some of these things where you want to send flowers to a loved one or you want to get your hair cut, a lot of these things where people have really been inconvenienced, they can be shorter rather than longer. But again, that's a decision from Governor Evers, and I know Ed's not the only person because I've heard from more than one wanting to know why people couldn't have had one person come in at a time and what's the difference with that. Well, I would frankly say that's not a decision that I made. That's one that Governor Evers made. So reach out to his office and see what he thinks.
Yeah, I think everybody can figure that out. We'll get by on that front.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate the reporters who were on the call. Senator Fitzgerald and I hope to do this on a regular basis because we want to make sure that we're available to answer your questions and also those of the public. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civic broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.